I would like to begin by telling you about an experiment. A neuropsychologist by the name of Angela Framath and a psychologist by the name of George Ronan decided to perform a study on how patients make decisions about their health. Or rather, what sorts of evidence influences patients to follow one path of treatment over another. Some of the obstacles to patients making sound choices, obstacles that they wanted to address, included over-reliance on past experiences, emotional override, and not comprehending statistical information. In general, subjects were more likely to be swayed by portrayals of individuals than by data that studied large swaths of invisible and nameless people. So they decided to test the effect of anecdotal evidence on patient decision making. Test subjects were given stories that fit into three categories. The anecdotes either had a strong positive outcome, like a full recovery from an illness, a strong negative outcome, like death or prolonged illness, or a story with inconclusive and ambiguous results. In addition, patients were given statistics and data so that it would be possible to measure the effect of anecdote versus the effect of data. The results were perhaps not so surprising. Choosing a treatment is likely to be enhanced by pairing the treatment with a positive outcome. So choosing the treatment, more likely with a positive anecdote about that treatment. Avoiding a treatment is likely to be enhanced by pairing the treatment with a negative anecdote. In each case, the patients considered the story and its outcome more than they considered the statistics. These results, I believe, speak to something deep about the way we as humans interact with evidence. What we are seeing with these patients, the way in which anecdotes move people towards certain behaviors and away from other behaviors, is not just a question confronting healthcare in the 21st century, but a problem that has been confronting philosophy and rhetoric for thousands of years, from antiquity to the present. The 12th century Islamic philosopher Ibn Rushd, or Averroes as he was more commonly known, had a great deal to say about the problem of persuasion, examples, and the use of verbal imagery to influence people. Averroes lived in Cordoba, Spain, in the 12th century, and spent a great deal of time thinking about logic and what its proper role should be in shaping society. He gave tremendous importance to philosophy and science, perhaps more than anyone else of his time, but he understood that the majority of people, as he saw them, were not likely to respond to logical deductions. This is why in one of his most notable works, called Fasl al-Maqal, the decisive treatise, he divided thinking into three discourses: the philosophers who reasoned through logic, the theologians who reasoned through dialogue and demonstration, and the lay people, everyone else, who reasoned through rhetoric. Averroes commented frequently upon the power of examples to educate the ordinary. In his commentary on Aristotle's Poetics, he wrote, "Due to the pleasure existing in examples, they are a tool that tends to produce understanding about the intended object. Through the pleasure the soul takes in them, the soul becomes more completely receptive to that object." Examples, or what we in this case might call anecdotal evidence, produces pleasure, and the soul becomes receptive to whatever lesson you are trying to teach. I think what Averroes is describing with the pleasure center of the soul is the same phenomenon that Framath and Ronan were describing in their experiment. Patients became more receptive to one treatment or another as a result of encountering examples, stories of what happened to others. Averroes wanted to understand the connection between examples, verbal images, and the movement of the soul, or what we might call the mind, to be attracted to some things or repulsed by others. Real so-called philosophers could understand things without relying on the mind's eye, conceiving of things in the imagination. but ordinary learners needed to experience knowledge in the realm of the senses. There is, as Averroes points out, a certain delight in having knowledge exemplified into concrete images, compelling narratives about good people attaining rewards for their virtue and evil people being punished for their base actions. These are the kind of stories that are most likely to set, as he would call it, the appetitive powers of the soul into motion. Averroes, in his Sociology of Knowledge, dividing society into three classes, each with its own discourse, probably goes against what we want to believe about scientific literacy and communication. However, Averroes is primarily concerned with the efficacy of rhetoric, the pursuit and flight of the soul. Physicians face an inherent gap in knowledge between their patients and themselves. However, we can conceive of this relationship as Averroes would, a relationship between teacher and student. And as he and so many other scholars of rhetoric observed, examples wield a powerful force that allows for understanding and generates a response. Seneca, the Roman Stoic philosopher, said that the road by precepts is tedious, by example, short and efficacious. In other words, example is kind of like a shortcut. It goes deeper into the soul or the mind and connects the sub-rational parts of ourselves with the abstract concepts that we are trying to convey, the psychological with the logical. Something that is probably on all of our minds these days is the topic of vaccination and viruses. The historian Anne Erickson describes how in the 18th century, when statistical methods first became widely available in Europe, physicians were trying to inoculate populations from smallpox and other viruses. Some physicians, like the famous La Condamine in France, emphasized the social status of his patients rather than the quantity, turning them into examples to be admired and followed, such as the Queen of Denmark or the Prince of Wales. This returns us to the perennial issue of anecdotal evidence, and indeed, the issue every single time that we use an example. What do we do when our imperfect evidence is very persuasive and our best data fails to move the soul? Physicians will not be discarding persuasive rhetoric anytime soon.